Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. If you've watched this show, Man in America, either a couple of times, you could probably see that, you know what, Seth has a little bit of an agenda here. It's like, okay, what's Seth's agenda? Well, my agenda is to expose communism because I hate communism. And in fact, a lot of the struggles and the hell that is happening in our country right now, I would say is the fault of communism. I would even be so bold as to say that we're already living in many ways in a communist system. Look at our tax rates. Look at the censorship. There's a lot of things about our society that make us say, you know what? We're not, kind of fighting off communism. It's already here. We have to get rid of it. And so I'm always looking for tools and information that I can share with you, that you can share with your friends and family, that help people to understand what we're up against here in America, and not just what we're up against, but what the outcome is for America if we aren't able to root out this evil system from our country. And so joining me today is my friend James Lindsay, who is someone who's a huge voice amplifying, exposing communism. And today we're going to be talking about his recent documentary that he's featured in called Beneath Sheep's Clothing. And look, I've watched a lot of documentaries about communism and what's happening in America. I have to say, this is one of the best that I've seen. So we're going to show the trailer in the interview and talk a lot about not just, Beneath Sheep's Clothing and the communist takeover of America, but we're going to be honing in today specifically about the American church, the agenda behind taking over the churches from the perspective of the KGB and the communists, but also what the one world religion looks like and how to understand the blueprint for turning our world into a place that literally practices a one world religion. And the scary thing is that a lot of people go into their same churches and mosques and whatever may not even know that they're already participating in the one world religion. So folks, please enjoy this interview with James Lindsay. Mr. James Lindsay, it is always an honor to have you back on the show. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
So I feel like that there's never been a moment, or maybe there was, in the McCarthy era, where communism has been discussed on such a national scale. And I think it's a really good thing. And you even had, in the most recent debate, Trump pointing out that, Kamala's father was a Marxist. And it's now become a major discussion, and it's really good because I think it's undoing what I think is the greatest strength of the modern day communism in America, is the fact that it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's hidden. They don't want you to know it's actually communism, but people are discovering it. No thanks to thanks to people like yourself that have put in massive amounts of effort into doing that. And your recent documentary that you're very central to, Beneath Sheep's Clothing, which we'll be talking about today, is a really important tool in exposing that as well. And so we'll show the trailer, but I first off want to say, just kind of throw it to you. When someone asks you, they say, James, come on, man, like, is this really, this is America, we're free. Like, are we really living under communism? Is it really a communist coup, or is it just bad government policy? Like, how would you respond to that question from somebody?
I would tell them that this actually is a communist coup. Of course, it's taking a 21st century form, not the classical 1917 Leninist structure that they might be looking for, the 1940s Maoist structure that they're looking for. So it's got a new character, but it's certainly a communist coup. And when you look at these bad policies, if it was merely bad policy, you could pretty much expect bad policy to point in kind of random directions, but it all points in one direction. And that direction aligns again and again and again with communist power plays and with actually communist policy. And it's pretty easy to pull that apart. So that's one of the reasons why kind of the tagline that we've given to Beneath Sheep's Clothing is it's not coming, it's here. And we're trying to sound the alarm for Americans kind of at this 11th hour, that, or maybe even that it's 5 minutes to midnight, and that we had better get ourselves together and stop this.
I couldn't agree more. Well, let me go ahead and play the trailer for the documentary, because it really helps set the stage for our discussion today. So this is Beneath Sheep's Clothing. We'll pull up the website later, but let's go take a look at the trailer. I think it's like a minute, a little over a minute. So it's a pretty short one. So let's look at this first.
One of the most consequential lies of history is that Karl Marx put forth an economic theory or doctrine. He did not. He put forth a totalitarian religion.
This was a rape of the body of Christ.
He said the ultimate objective was to destroy Christianity. Those were his words.
And Khrushchev bragged about it. We'll take America without firing a shot. hi, I'm here to impoverish, enslave, and murder you.
They were actual communists. The result you can see.
We have to stay woke.
There are ravening wolves in sheep's clothing all over the place.
So their hard-hitting trailer. It's a very hard-hitting documentary, and I'm someone that has spent a lot of my adult life trying to understand and study communism, and I had tons of aha moments. And what I'd like to do with today's discussion is take one chunk, and I'm sure we'll go beyond it, but one chunk of what really hit me with the documentary, which was the role of religion. And, when you look at the persecution the Christians underwent under Soviet rule in Europe, it was astounding that it became obvious to me that there was something much deeper, and obviously you pointed out in that too, that they had to actually remove Christianity to allow communism to properly take hold in that country, because Christianity was the antithesis of communism, whereas communism is atheist. But actually, I don't, in a lot of ways, I don't look at communism as being atheist, because I think that communists hate God. And so to hate God, you have to acknowledge God. Marx talked about God, talked about his hatred and his pact with Satan to basically, walk in the ashes of God's creation. And so it really, what I left with, one of the strong messages was that why they have to focus so heavily on Christianity and why they have to destroy it and undermine it and infiltrate it, but also how that then ties into a one world religion, which I want to get into that because that was really profound. But from what you're seeing, when you look around America, and as someone that has thoroughly studied communism, you've written books on it, you give speeches on it, you're an expert on it. When you look around in America and you see these policies, and the policies that are favoring, say, Islam or favoring different religions, what you see almost in every instance is you see that there's an attack on Christianity. There's an attack on, what they call the Christian nationalism, the Christians that believe that the country is great for its founding values that were based on Christian values, etc. So how do you look at the attack on Christianity in America right now and tie that into the overall agenda of bringing in a communist system in America?
Okay, so I'll start. I mean, you mentioned Soviet Union. I'm not really going to get right now into the details, but nobody in the history of mankind, in all likelihood, has done more to experiment with the limits of torture that they can excruciate on somebody or execute on somebody in order to try to get them to renounce their faith. Nobody's done more than the Soviets. Some of the experiments that they ran, not just the persecution in Soviet Union more broadly, but for example, in the Soviet satellite of Romania, the Petsy prison experiment is actually, when you read about what happened there, is beyond comprehension. It's one of those things that when you find out that it happened, you wish you never found out that it happened, and you can never forget that it happened. And the goal was to crush not just Christians, but Jews. And I think it's very important for us to put these two together. Marx was very clear from his fairly early writings, including his very early writing on the Jewish question as the title, that he had absolutely no patience whatsoever for Jews or for Christians. That those belief systems, he said, were degenerate and that they stood in the way of a true understanding of man's lot in life, and so that they had to be removed. He said that the solution to the Jewish problem in the world would be to eliminate Judaism, but he said that you would do that by making them non-Jewish. In other words, by pushing them out of their religion, not necessarily by some kind of Hitlerian kind of final solution. And I reiterate, because it's very important to understand that Marx was targeting both Jews and Christians, and for the same reason. That reason is that Jews and Christians share in common a commitment to a higher authority that they will not throw away for commitment to the state, which is what communism as a religion demands. The state takes the role of God as the shaper of society and man in man's life, and the giver and the creator, and that from which all blessings flow. And of course, we try to communicate that message about communism, Soviet communism in particular, in the film. But he went on, his first major writing that he ever published in 1844 at the very beginning of the year. So he had written it in the previous year, was his critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. That's the piece. It's probably the most famous piece, not by title, but by reference of Karl Marx. Of course, Capital is the most famous by title, but a lot of people don't know what the contents of Capital is. The Communist Manifesto is probably next, and they maybe know a little bit about the contents of that. But this Marx's critique of Hegel's philosophy of right is virtually unknown, except that its first page contains the famous "religion is the opiate of the masses" sentence. And if you actually read that page, he says that the beginning of all criticism is the criticism of religion. And what he's actually articulating, which he repeats in his 1844 Paris manuscripts, which he repeats later on in his other writings, is that what you have to do if you want to make room for communism is you have to bulldoze the landscape of this opiate. The way that an opiate works isn't that it is a painkiller. Common misconception: opiates do not kill pain. They hijack the part of your brain that cares that you're in pain. So they get rid of you caring that you have pain so you can you can have pain without suffering, in other words. So you kind of go numb to what's happening, but without physically going numb. And so this is what he says religion does. He says that we all live in suffering. We all have tremendous suffering and problems in our lives, and we would be able to understand the true causes of those sufferings and those problems if we didn't have religion numbing us to the experience. And so religion is allowing us to say, well, this is just how it is. This is God's will. This is a lesson for me to learn. All of these kinds of messages of forbearance, keep your faith in the Lord, and, don't despair, and all of this. Karl Marx doesn't want you to do that. He wants you to think somebody else, namely the ruling class, the powered class, the middle class, is causing all of your problems, so that you will be agitated to wish to revolt against them and have a revolutionary reconstitution of society in the name of Marxism. He actually goes so far in that famous first page, not just calling religion the opium of the masses, but he goes on to say that religion is the false sun that man revolves around until he realizes that he's his own true sun to revolve around himself. In other words, get rid of God so man can worry about man, and man can worry about man's issues, and man can blame other men for their problems and thus overthrow the cause of the problems. He says that the purpose of this, read it for yourself to see his flowery language, and I mean that literally. He makes allusions to flowers. You can read it yourself and you see that his primary message is that only by getting rid of religion as a palliative so that we can understand our true suffering can we come to know our true nature as beings who suffer, but suffer needlessly, and thus seek to change the material aspects of our conditions. This is why he says the point is not to study society, but to change it. In other words, to overthrow the oppressive system he believes defines society. Like I said, he goes on to explain this later in 1844, the same year, in his famous Paris manuscripts, or economic philosophic manuscripts. He goes on and he has this long digression that's kind of peculiar about why atheism is actually crap. Atheism is for him basically, the way that I think the best metaphor for me is that it's like tilled soil. He doesn't say that. So let's say you have a plot of land, and it has grasses or bushes or shrubs or trees or forest, whatever growing on it, but you want to farm that land. That's all of the stuff that's growing there is religion. And what you have to do is plow and till the soil first. You have to make the soil bare and ready for being planted. And that's atheism. But he says atheism is not even really truly philanthropic. He says it's not even a basis. The true basis is communism, awakening to our true social and human nature. And then that, again, my metaphor, not his, is what is going to grow in that soil. So Marx's attacks on religion are not of the kind of the atheist, like we saw with the so-called New Atheist movement, or with Bertrand Russell from a century ago.
Folks, we all see it. Everything's getting more expensive. We're paying 2, 3, 4 times what things cost just a few years ago. And we know they're lying. 3% inflation, really? Think about it. Why are they telling us to keep our hard-earned money in the banks and stock market while they're rushing to buy gold and silver? That's right. Governments and central banks around the world are dumping the dollar and scrambling to buy gold and silver right now. These are smart people. They see the signs just like you do. They know the crash is coming. The dollar has lost more than half its value in the last 5 years, and our national debt's increasing $1 trillion every 100 days. It can't go on like this. Even Bank of America's warning about a dollar collapse. And if they're right, it's only a matter of time before our savings, our IRAs, and our 401ks could be wiped out. Look, right now, it's still easy to buy gold and silver, but in the future, it may not be. Experts are saying that prices will keep surging, and UBS says that gold could even go up to $5,000 an ounce. Noble Gold's phones have been ringing off the hook because the folks who get it aren't wasting time. Now, I can't tell you what to do with your hard-earned money, but I can tell you that even if just some of your savings are in gold and silver, you can rest assured that money is safe. So call Noble Gold and protect your wealth today. It's better to be 6 months early than 1 day late. So call Noble Gold today at 626-654-1906 or visit goldwithseth.com and set up your free wealth consultation. The phone number and the websites are also in the show's description.
Any of these kinds of, are these theological and philosophical, ontological arguments really all that sound, right? It's not of that kind. It is of the kind that says, you have a religion that's in my way, so I'm going to get rid of that religion so that I can supplant a new religion, which Marx did not call Marxism. He referred to it by the following words, which were humanism, socialism, communism, and naturalism. And he said that they are all equal to one another when they are fully developed, and that in full development, they are communism that recognizes itself as a fully developed humanism, blah, blah, blah. How does that attach to today? Well, Christianity is the dominant religion of the West. More importantly, it is our philosophical underpinning, or theological underpinning in some sense. Philosophical is a little more complicated. We've got some Greece, we've got some Rome, we've got a lot of Jerusalem mixed into our foundations here in the United States, in Western liberal republics. And so that is the thing that's in the way. And what the communists have realized since the rough beginning of the 20th century is that something endemic to Christian, capitalist, American, or Western civilization, culture, is in the way. They stopped studying economics so much in Western Marxism, although Kamala Harris's father did study the processes of capital accumulation and inequity. That was literally what his thesis was about. I have a copy of it. I've read the first chapter or so, but that's beside the point. They became more interested in what they called the culture of capitalism. What cultural factors, this is what we call cultural Marxism, what cultural factors uphold a belief in a capitalist system? And many of these tie back to that Judeo-Christian bedrock. Every time I talk to an observant or Orthodox Jew, I get the same message. Every time I talk to a devout, serious Christian, I get the same message. And these are not the message about the founding of the United States. I mean the message of what values make a civilization work. And these are the values that our founding fathers drew upon, quoting heavily from Leviticus, not just the New Testament when they were creating the country, but also drawing heavily from Rome and also drawing heavily from Greece, which are not within the Christian circles. And so this is a very different kind of experiment, but he knows he's got to get this out of here. So what this new project, and I'll tie up here, how are these attacks like? What in the world, what does Minneapolis playing the call to prayer while forbidding the 10 Commandments in schools, right? So you say, oh, they're playing the call to prayer. Well, why? Why are they playing the call to prayer 5 times a day in Minneapolis? Well, it's because there's an exemption in the law for church bells. So we have to be equal, right? So if the churches can ring their bells in public squares, once a week, by the way, then Muslim call to prayer can be played in order to be fair to the Muslims. And so you can't really read that as a blatant attack on Christianity, except in that it's 5 times a day versus once or twice a week, until you add in that the 10 Commandments can't be displayed on public property. Then all of a sudden you're saying, wait a minute, this is actually religious favoritism that's happening here. It's very subtle, but it's still religious favoritism. And Christians, of course, and Jews, in fact, are picking up on it. And what's going on there is this concept that comes from the father of cultural Marxism, which I just said is relevant. His name's Antonio Gramsci. He's mentioned, obviously, in the film. And Gramsci said famously that socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. So Christianity is blatantly the target of cultural Marxism, and the practice is called counter-hegemony. So prevailing Western culture is hegemonic. It's like a cultural force field that keeps other cultural values at bay. Communists trying to break down the Western cultural hegemony do not care what outside values they bring in, so long as it causes division. So if they bring in communists and communist critique or atheist critique, fine. But if they bring in something like Islam just to generate extra conflict, fine as well. And so what you have here is what's called, in that case, the Red-Green Alliance. You have Muslims who wish to take over the Christian West for Muslim purposes, and you have communists who wish to take over the Christian West for communist purposes. And they're like, you know what? If we work together, we have a better chance, and then we can sort it out afterwards. And in some cases, like in Iran, it ends up Islamic. And in other cases, like in Western China, where the Uyghurs are, it ends up communist. It just depends on who has the upper hand on the power. And I'm sure both groups think for whatever reason they will be the one who does. But what that is it's a counter-hegemonic attack meant to fulfill Marx's vision that history moves through the conflict of contending classes. So you import a contending class, then you generate an issue for conflict, and you let the conflict play out. This is the dialectical materialism playing out in the sociological realm, and it's a deliberate provocation and attack to try to water down and pull us away. It's racist to criticize any of that, right? That's the accusation. So it's racist to therefore stand for something like the ringing of the church bells or the Ten Commandments or some Christian display. Of course, there is a bulldoze it all solution, which is don't put any of it in the public square, which of course just makes everything a little bit more hollow, a little bit more empty, but does actually address the problem. Of course, the other solution is let every single possible thing ring to drown it out in cacophony, but that's just a step to the bulldozer to clear everything out of the way. But this is a deliberate attack to try to get especially young people to start to question the foundations of our civilization, so that there is, how are you going to defend something you feel like you can't stand for? You won't. And so you'll give it over. And as you feel more and more disconnected from your roots, and you have this all-powerful state entity with the money printer in its hand coming along and saying, we can solve all your problems, who are you going to turn to in your distress? Well, not God, because we got God out of the way. So the only thing to turn to is the state. And that's where Marx said all legitimate criticism starts with the criticism of religion.
Gosh, there's so much to focus on from that. And so when you look at the church here, and what I'm seeing is obviously there's a lot of religions in America, a lot of variety, or it's part of America, right? Religious freedom. But there is a large chunk of Christians here. And I remember interviewing Trevor Loudon about his Enemies Within the Church documentary, talking specifically about the communist takeover of the churches, and not just the churches, the theology schools, so that all the pastors and everyone coming out of those schools and then heading at the churches are aligned to the communist values. But I think that whether you look at, I say, like the wolf in sheep's clothing, or even the saying of the road to hell is paved in good intentions, I think that really encapsulates what I understand to be happening, and what I think is really reinforced with the documentary is that it's such a brilliant move to hijack the church message, because this is, a lot of people, a lot of Christians, I think they may not read their Bible very often. They go to church on Sundays and they listen to the pastor, right? So they're not fact checking the pastor. It's similar to the media, right? They turn on the TV and, Anderson Cooper said this, and they just take it as the gospel, literally. And so when people are trying to, they're going to church because they want to, maybe some of them want to be better people. They believe in God, they believe in religion. Some of them, I'm sure, do it just for the social reasons, and because the society expects them to, or whatever. That's fine. That's their own thing they're doing. But when you can hijack the pulpit, and you can take these fundamentally Marxist, communist, and I would say even satanic ideals, and you can hide them behind the scripture, right, and different things that people are told, it's like the ultimate bait and switch. And I think that the pacification of the right that I've noticed in America, where I've looked at people and it's like, why are you not doing anything? Why are you just sitting on the sidelines, and you're too scared to be impolite? You don't want to offend anybody. I think a lot of that comes from the hijacking of the pulpit. and telling people that you should, not kind of focusing on like be wise, right, but actually just be really kind. It's all about love. And even in the documentary, there's a video of Kathy Hochul, right, the governor of New York, saying, be my apostles, right? Everyone getting their jab is the best for them, so God would want them to, and go out and encourage your friends and family to go get their COVID jab so they can be saved and save other people. It's like, it doesn't get any more obvious than that something other than Christianity has hijacked the Christian religion.
Yeah, that scene with Hochul is just unbelievable. It's literally, and I put, this is no shade at my Catholic friends or anybody else. They are literally turning the government-mandated mRNA gene therapy shot into a sacrament. You become clean by receiving it, and you have to get your booster to become clean again, and you're on the treadmill of some kind of state-provided. First of all, it's literally a gene therapy that's experimental, which is scary enough, but it's literally a state-mandated sacrament in order to make you clean and whole within society. And that should be extraordinarily alarming. So what I talked about in the previous segment then was about the external attack on the church, right? This counter-hegemonic, which is just kind of very broad. And there are, of course, just the criticisms. I gave more pass to the New Atheist movement than it deserves. I think it was a critical religious movement. I don't think most of the people participating in it had any idea that that's what it was, but it was the critical theory applied to Christian, mainstream Christianity, using often Islam as a proxy to be able to attack. Every time like the pushback would come too hard on the New Atheists for attacking Christianity, they would say, well, look at Islam. And all of a sudden the Christians would kind of get on board and say, whoa, okay, yeah, that's really a problem. And then they would go back to say, well, Christianity is no different, which is fundamentally not true. I mean, actually, Islam has much more in common with communism than it has with Christianity, far, far more. I mean, Islam itself means submission. And communism believes that when you have submission to your true nature as a socialist, that everything will work out. And I mean, they're not identical, obviously, but they have far more in common. They're both actually totalitarian in their organization. Not to say that you can't try to find a liberal pathway to practicing Islam, fine, whatever. But the doctrine is what the doctrine is. It says what it says. Okay, so the internal attack on the church is also, in fact, probably more relevant. And when we talk about what we see in the film in Beneath Sheep's Clothing, what you see, for example, when Timothy's talking, is this Soviet who lived in Siberia and was heavily persecuted for his faith, which he wouldn't renounce. And when you hear Julie Bailing talking about her experience talking to Russians when she was there in the 90s after the Soviet Union collapsed, just after, actually, what you see is that religion was not actually squashed, right? And so I don't know that Lenin had too much to do with this. Of course, Lenin famously said the best way to control the opposition is to become the opposition ourselves. But certainly under Stalin, and then later in the Soviet Union, whether it's Khrushchev or whoever else, you have this situation in which they set up a church that was, frankly, a Potemkin church. It was a Soviet cutout of the church, a KGB cutout. In fact, the priests, these are of course posing as Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, but the priests themselves were actually KGB agents. And the KGB would infiltrate all the churches, as Timothy says, and cause the congregation to have conflict and to rise up so that they can install a new church leadership, which would be KGB controlled. So they literally created what was called the registered church, and the registered church was in line completely with Soviet doctrine and was teaching Orthodox Christianity as a vehicle to actually preach Soviet communism. And this actually, that's the Eastern model. That's what happened in Soviet Union. Of course, it's much different in China because it wasn't predominantly or even majority or even close to majority Christian. So we don't have to talk about Mao, but we do have to talk about South America and the creation of liberation theology, which of course was also likely fueled, if not created, by KGB agents who went to try to make sure that their biggest source of opposition at the time they viewed was the Vatican, was the Catholic Church. And so what were they going to do? Well, we can't beat the opposition, so we become the opposition ourselves. So they seed South America that's filled with colonialism and corruption and all of these backwards peasanty type problems that were all very genuinely, a highly stratified society in terms of wealth. And they seeded it with Marxist doctrine fed through the gospel. And this was done through priests mentioned in the film, such as Dom Elder Camara, who is in Recife, Brazil, who mentored a number of famous people, including the current
Klaus
Pope,
Schwab,
who is saying that we should be working, that Christians and Marxists should be working together to overcome corruption of all things. And then Klaus Schwab, which is depicted in the film. And then also Paulo Freire, who is the architect of the critical pedagogy that's infused every bit of our education. This is all liberation theology. And our schools are actually teaching a modified version of liberation theology. As a matter of fact, culturally relevant teaching is liberation theology contoured to the critical race and queer theory context. But simultaneously, we can't just blame, naive South American Catholics for allowing the infiltration of their church. And Dom Elder Camara, by the way, didn't start off as a Catholic, he did start off as Catholic. He didn't start off as a communist. He started off as something called an integralist. And the integralists are Catholics who were actually closer to fascism and that were fighting the communists. And then he decided, for whatever reason, he flipped. And I'm assuming this has something to do with KGB infiltration, but I don't know why he flipped. And as soon he was fast-tracked through the ranks of the Catholic Church as an integralist so that he could do this. And then he claims he had like a complete change of heart when he visited the slums of Recife, the favelas, as they called in Portuguese, and became a communist. And went on to do everything else that we've already talked about. But we can't just blame, like I said, kind of maybe naive or maybe infiltrated or whatever South American Catholics. The Christian left in the Protestant tradition in the United States is also highly infected. There was a thing that came out in the early 1900s, 1906, maybe plus or minus two, called the social gospel. The social gospel was promulgated by a preacher in Hell's Kitchen, New York City, called Walter Rauschenbusch, who is also the grandfather of the postmodern pragmatist Richard Rorty. And so Walter Rauschenbusch came up with this social gospel after spending a year living, or a little over a year, living in London with the Fabian Society's members, Sidney and Beatrice Webb. He comes back to New York, creates the social gospel, and the social gospel is designed to push that Jesus was the first socialist and that the purpose of Jesus's death and resurrection was, just like in liberation theology, to free the oppressed. It was actually to end racism and end all of this unfairness. And the social gospel, which was primarily a Baptist phenomenon for a very long time, became a very prominent feature of the Christian left in the United States until the kind of big revival period kind of flipped Baptist theology in a very conservative in the 50s and 60s. But that thread had already woven itself into a ton of progressive things. Meanwhile, the Anglican Church caved to this kind of thinking very early, and that matriculated into the West. So all of these characters, Dom Elder Camara, Paulo Freire in particular, fast forward to the 1970s, spent a decade in Geneva working at the World Council of Churches, which was also a KGB setup and was filled with KGB influences, which is also a spinoff of the World Parliament of Churches, which had Soviet fingerprints all over it from the beginning. And so this goal to infiltrate into the churches and twist the message of the scripture has been a project from the very early days of Soviet Union, when they fully realized that, particularly in the West, but even in their experiments in Soviet Union, that they were not going to be able to crush Christianity out of people. Better to subvert it and change it. And so I'm seeing now a two-step conversion. Every good psyops, there's cheap psyops and good psyops, right? A cheap psyops has one target. You want to make everybody believe something, and some people don't. A more sophisticated or a good psyops has two dumping points. You want to make everybody believe something, but then for the people who aren't going to, you want to make sure the largest number of them possible believe some other wrong thing instead. And here's an example of how you can do that with Christian scripture. I use this example a lot, so if people have heard it before, I apologize. But where Jesus in Matthew 10:14, is it 14 or 16? 14's shake the dust from your feet. 16 is where he's saying, I send you out. And it's going to be dangerous. So you need to be as wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And I bring that up because you have to have two commandments. He has two commandments there. He gives two things. You have to be two things: wise as serpents, in other words, discerning, and gentle as doves, in other words, kind and gentle in manner. Not quite so winsome, but something like that, right? So there's two commandments. And if you're not both, are you fulfilling Jesus's orders? No. Is it likely to work out for you? No, because you're not doing it right. He gave you two instructions. You have to do them both, right? It's a very simple idea. Well, the communists come along and they subvert the first time by whispering, like the serpent in Genesis, hey, Jesus said, be as gentle as doves. And you can't say, no, he didn't, because he did say that. What you have to say is that's not all he said, because fact check is not false. The fact check is misleading, right? So Jesus did technically say, be gentle, but he said something else too. But a lot of people, like you said, go to church. They don't really read their Bibles. They're not really paying attention. The pastor might have even done a full shrift on this and said, hey, look, here's what it says. Wise as serpents and gentle as doves. So let's focus on the gentle part. And then does this whole sermon on the gentle. So he said the truth, right? He didn't lie. He just misled you, unfortunately. And maybe even the pastor's not paying enough attention and gets subverted by this interpretation. He's read something, thinks it's a big deal, wants to bring his message to his thing. But the thing that he read happened to be maybe a planted article by a KGB agent. Who knows, right? And you don't know that. So here you are. And now you've given up on the discerning part. So you're going to be gentle when you shouldn't be. You're going to refuse to stand up and be the good shepherd, protecting his flock with your body and your life against the ravening wolves when you should be. You're not doing that because you're just being gentle. Oh yeah, come in. Let's affirm kids who want to have mental illness. Let's affirm transition. Let's let in all the illegal aliens because they're our neighbors too, right? Love thy neighbor. That's not what Jesus said either, by the way. That's fact check, misleading. Love God and love your neighbor is what he actually said. 2 commandments, yet again. So what happens? So there's your first subversion, and you start getting these gentle, meek isn't the right word because that implies strength when needed. Gentle, doormat Christians who just let things happen. And of course, things go awry. Of course, you're not having a good situation because Jesus gave you 2 things to do and you're only doing one of them. And if Jesus told you the truth, then you better do all of it, right? So then the communists come along with a second subversion. They plant somebody who looks like, enough of this. This isn't going well. We have to fight back. And the problem is being gentle. We're being too gentle. Now we have to be hard asses. Now we have to destroy our enemies like they destroy us. Now we have, which is, turn the other cheek. If you're robbed, offer your coat. These are not the kinds of things Jesus instructed, but you can get taken all the way off track in a second subversion. So your psyops now, or your subversion of this particular commandment in scripture is, first, you want lots of people to just be gentle and to stay on the couch when they should be standing up and saying no more. And, some of them aren't going to do it. So you want to put some false flag operators in somewhere to come along, a KGB operator dressed as a clergyman to come in, or maybe it's not KGB, maybe it's a homegrown communist terrorist, whatever, who's going to stand up and say, you know what, being gentle is the problem. And so now you have both prongs of the dual pronged psyops, and you have all your gentle Christians who aren't fighting back, and then the ones who are fighting back in a way that actually benefits you. They are turning fascist and become the prime examples and the prime call for government power to squash Christian resistance. And then that creates this cycle of more people wanting to sit it out, not knowing what to do. And this is actually how they do subversion. And imagine that's one piece of scripture. Imagine how they have hundreds or thousands of them they can pick from to twist a message week after week after week after week with the Christians who are still going to church, which isn't even most of them anymore, to convince them to do things like sit this one out, don't get political, don't vote. God's got it. God's in control. Don't vote. And this is where they grilled President Trump for pointing this out and making a joke about it recently. I was in the room when he made the joke, as it turns out. I was listening to that speech live, and President Trump said, he made this whole thing. He's like, do you know that the number one poorest voting bloc in the country, in the United States, is Christians? They vote at lower propensity than anybody else. And he makes this joke. He's like, just go vote this one time and then we'll fix it. Meaning the electoral system, there won't be any more cheating. We'll get that cleaned up. He's like, just go vote this one time and you won't have to do it anymore. And he's just making this like joking plea, teasing the Christians, because it was a Turning Point Believers Summit for Christians, that they don't vote very much. Right? Just go do it once. Just hold your nose. Get in there and do it. He's teasing them, which is totally a Grandpa Trump thing to do. And the media ran with it and said, of course, that he was going to be a dictator. That was proof he was going to transform our system to a one-party system, blah, blah, blah. And so this is how they do, man. This is how they do. But yeah, that's one example. The other example I already gave you of one of these 2 commandments in one deals, love God and love the truth. Love God and love your neighbor. They say Jesus said, love your neighbor. And then here's all this laundry list of crap you're supposed to do that doesn't seem like a very good idea. It seems like you're being coerced into doing something that is being foisted on you by love your neighbor. And like I said, we could come up with 100 examples. Blessed are the meek. Let's just misinterpret meek and make sure that nobody does anything. And so, like Lenin said, if you want to control the opposition, the best way is to become the opposition yourself. And they did. They infiltrated these churches. We drop copious receipts, both in the terms of the Soviet Union and in the terms of our modern situation, including the development of the liberation theology. I think we talked about social gospel. I mean, I saw a lot of versions of the film as it was being put together, so I don't remember what made the final cut. But certainly, the subversions today, even down to the point, there's flashes of Rick Warren, America's pastor, at Davos. What did he say there? He said, well, you guys got public, you guys have got private, you got the governments, you have the industries, but there's a third leg to this stool. That's what he said. Go look up Rick Warren 2008 World Economic Forum Davos. See what you see. Tony Blair introduces him, and then he says, he basically tells the crowd there at the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, you have two legs of the stool. 5.7 billion people are religious, and we're the third leg of the stool, and you better make us happy. And then Klaus Schwab comes out in 2016 and publishes from the World Economic Forum a document titled something like The Role of Faith in Addressing Global Systemic Challenges or something like that. And he has right there as a pull quote in big giant letters on the first or second page or whatever, Klaus Schwab says that new values cannot be justified by the intellect alone. It requires faith. And it's a whole description of how all of the different world religions are to twist themselves around in order to push the vehicle of this new 21st century communism that the World Economic Forum, United Nations, and CCP are collaborating to bring us.
So I'm glad that you're leading into the whole idea of a one world religion, and I'll pull the website up as we're talking, because so this is where folks go. I could not recommend this film enough. It's Beneath Sheep's Clothing.movie. I'll put the trailer in the description, but it's such a powerful film, and honestly, I think that if there's folks that want to use these kinds of tools to help their neighbors and their friends and their family to wake up and see. Because that's ultimately, I think that's the solution to this, is more Americans have to see that it's not a sheep, it's a wolf, and they're going to eat us as soon as we vote, kind of let them kind of take over. This documentary is what shows that. And so one of the questions that I had for you, because it really hit me, I think that this is one of like the biggest aha moments I have in watching the documentary, was people that are studying the things that we're studying have heard of the idea of a one world religion, one world government, etc. Now, I always thought like, okay, how will they create a one world religion? Like, what are they going to call it? Like, UNism or whatever it is. And it's like, how do they get people to abandon Christianity and Buddhism and Taoism and Judaism? And, how do they get them to abandon these and accept some foreign thing? But what I realized through this, and there's this one specific moment in the documentary where you're talking about how there's a diamond, and diamond has different facets. And those facets are the different religions, right? So, Islam and Christianity and Judaism, etc. But the diamond itself is this DEI woke agenda, and then it really hit me. It was like, that's the blueprint. Like, that's the blueprint for a one world religion, is to take the core of every religion, align it around these rebranded communist values of acceptance and, like subordinates to the state, etc. And so that way, all the religions around the world are in essence actually practicing one religion, and it's a religion that worships the state and it worships science instead of God and the church, right? And that really hit it actually home for me, because it's like, oh, actually, I think a lot of Christians in America and a lot of Buddhists in China and a lot of Taoists in Vietnam or whatever, that they're actually already practicing the one world religion. They just don't know it. Like, that was like one of those moments, like my head was just like exploding open. But what did I summarize that properly? Is that your same kind of understanding, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And to say it in Russian, the Russian word for this is razuna. Let me see if I can remember how to say it. Razubrazia. No, I didn't. I've ruined it. I could say it yesterday. I'm trying to learn how to say it. Raznobrazia is how you actually say that. Okay, I got that right. Raznobrazia. And what that means is diversity. What it means is unity through diversification. In other words, the D in the DEI program was born under Lenin and Stalin. in the early 1920s. Raznobraziet. So that's the program, right? Diversity, or it's unity through diversification. So the diamond represents the diversity of all the religions, but the diamond itself is a single stone that has its single core values. So this is the exact same program. It's a diversity program where everybody, all the diverse races, all the diverse sexualities see themselves how? Through the socialist relationship that they have to the power dynamics of society. Well, all these religions are going to see themselves how? Through the new values imported of specifically sustainability and inclusion are the named values that they keep pushing. And so all of the religions are going to be retooled to worship something different while maintaining their outer vestiges. And that is the core essence of how they're going to create a one world religion. You say, what are you going to call it? Unism or whatever, which isn't a bad name, honestly. Humanism, although I think that well got tainted already. That was what Marx called it. And it's been called that since. The actual name for this, and I think it's a good way to understand it, other than the diamond metaphor, is that this is a big mouthful. The term for this religion is cosmological monism. So cosmological means that everything in the cosmos, and monism is the way that Hinduism is structured. A lot of Westerners don't know how Hinduism is structured. We have monotheism here, right? One God. And we understand that. We also understand, in contrast, polytheism. Well, then we look at Hinduism and we don't know what in the world's going on, right? Because they have a bajillion gods. I think in Houston, they put up a statue to Hanuman, who is the monkey-faced god, who's a perfect grammarian and multiple other things. They have all these gods. In fact, more gods than you could ever name, more gods than you could ever count. And it turns out that if you ask them that there's only one God, how can that be? How can they have all of these local village deities and then there's only one God, Brahman, right? Oh, he's a high God, right? Over the other gods. No, that's not the way monism works. This is where many and one are the same in Hinduism. It's the concept of what they call avatars. And so you have Brahman at the top, but he has three primary avatars: Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. And those are three facets of the one. It's not that God, if he revealed himself to you as Shiva, is Shiva. It is that still God, but he's showing you Shiva's face, right? And then Shiva has multiple avatars. So Hanuman, I forget which one Hanuman goes up to, but you can trace it from whatever village deity up to, oh, that's actually an avatar or a vision of this higher order deity. That's a vision of this higher order deity. And I don't know if it's Hanuman or not, but then we'll say who is a vision of Shiva, who's actually just another vision of Brahman. And so this is actually how Hinduism is organized. And, perhaps I've screwed up some of the minor details or names. It doesn't really matter. But the point is that each different of the thousands and millions of deities out there, each one is just a manifestation or a face, like the diamond, of one God. And so that's the idea. Every religion is now it's called cosmological monism. It doesn't matter, as the Pope literally said today, it doesn't matter which religion you're practicing, you're still moving toward the path of spiritual awakening or success. And so Christianity becomes, and scientism becomes, and idealist philosophy becomes, and mathematics becomes, because it's not limited just to religions, and Judaism becomes, and Islam becomes, all just pieces of a bigger story. Islam is just for them, of course, Muslims would be enraged to know that this is how they look at their religion, but Islam for the cosmological monists is just one image of the actual true religion, which is, you can call it cosmological monism. That's a way to describe or categorize it. Sometimes it's called the Prisca Theologia, which means the ancient theology. There's only one ancient theology, or the Philosophia Perennis is a way that it's phrased. Those are both obviously Greek terms. The Philosophia Perennis means the perennial philosophy, the perennial understanding of life, the perennial love of wisdom specifically. And so there's this one great truth. And yeah, if you want to approach that truth through Christianity, fantastic. That thing where Jesus said, I am the way, I am the way, the truth, and the life, like me, there's only one way. That's nice, but it's not totally true, because Muslims are just taking a different path to the same exact set of values. And those values actually are sustainability and inclusion, or as Marx referred to it, the completion of man and nature.
It's just incredible. But one thing that I do like is with the documentary, as much as it's heavy. I mean, it's like the reality is, for people that are willing to admit it, that the United States is undergoing a communist coup, right? If you look at Soviet Russia, you look at China. China went from being a relatively free society. They even had guns and they had freedom. It went to a communist nation where tens of millions of the Chinese were murdered by a totalitarian regime. The same thing happened in the Soviet Union. It's happened all over the country. America is not immune to that. And so I think it's important that we see documentaries like this because, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, I really believe that one of the greatest strengths that communism has, and by virtue of that, or maybe by unvirtue of that, one of the greatest strengths that Satan has is deception, is that you could be doing something like taking your kid to get his 14 different, kind of injections as soon as they're born. You think you're doing the right thing until there's something really bad that happens and you realize, wait, maybe that wasn't the best agenda I was following. Maybe it wasn't advice that was looking out for me. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. But even though it shows a pretty dark picture, it also ends, I think, with a lot of hope and a lot of empowerment, because it's not about getting the right person into the White House. It's not about passing some new law. It's about enough people seeing through communism, because there were a lot of countries that had communism that you couldn't even vote. There weren't even elections, yet communism still fell because enough people saw through it. Like, that's the solution. And that's why I'm so passionate, and we've done multiple shows on, talking about this document. I'm so passionate about it because it's like this documentary is one of these silver bullets you load into your gun to kill the specter of communism in someone's mind. You show it to them, and it does such a brilliant job of showing, like, okay, here's what this looked like. Here's the policy that Stalin was using or that Mao was using. Here's the exact same thing happening in America. And it goes to what I asked you earlier on in the show when I said, okay, James, if someone says, how can you tell? Right? It's pattern recognition, right? If you look at Socrates, right, he talks about, how do you know something is actually true? Well, you actually, it's hard to actually arrive at a place where it's absolute truth, but if you can find enough patterns and enough consistency, you start to understand, okay, this is what it is. And that's what I see too. Like, even looking at, Harris's platform, it's, price controls, it's heavy taxation, it's censorship, it's removing the right to guns. These are all things that communist regimes have done around the world. And so with this, as we're kind of concluding this, and I'll pull the website back up because it's like, this is my call to action, is like, go watch the documentary. You can go to beneathsheepsclothing.movie. You can purchase it. You can donate it to get it spread to more people. But towards the end, I think that it finished up, and you had some pretty powerful words towards the end, and talking about how are we really going to sit by and do nothing because we're scared of ostracizing ourselves and having our boss or our coworkers look down upon us for speaking the truth. Like, what we're doing with that is that we're actually handing that war to our children. Whereas we can fight it comfortably from our own homes, on social media, in our workplace. We can do it without fear of being thrown into a gulag. But if we don't step up now, what's going to happen is that our children, when they want their freedom, they're going to be the ones fighting to get out of the gulag to get it. So can you just kind of help round out this discussion with that point? Because I found that point to be so powerful, and obviously you understand it much better than I did, just in explaining it just now.
Yeah, well, thank you for that call to action. People need to see this film. I mean, I really usually don't talk about my work that way. I'm very weirdly, like, culturally libertarian, like, do what you want, I'm not going to tell you to go watch a movie or read a book. No, you need to go. People need to see this film because there's nothing out there that pulls back the curtain and says, I've heard from so many people that tell me this, that I wasn't quite sure, I was on the fence, or my mom didn't get it and now my mom gets it, right? I sat down, we watched it with my mom. My mom's like, oh my God, the commies are here, right? And so this movie actually pulls back the curtain in a way that nothing else has done. So people really do need to see it. Show it at your church, show it with your friends, sit down and have a watch night, whatever. Some people don't like that it costs a little bit of money. Well, we invest a lot of money to make it good. So it's watchable. Get 3 or 4 people together, a few bucks a piece, watch the movie. No big deal.
Well, I'll throw in a quick comment there, James, actually, is that we're up against the cultural mainstream that has been completely hijacked, that has unlimited budget to produce high value. So if we are only saying, hey, we're going to do everything for free, because we don't want to charge money for something, and we're going to, put together this B-roll, this kind of like B-movie type thing, it doesn't go anywhere. Like, we have to be able to meet that level of professionals, which, I mean, this movie does. It's like whether it's the editing, the soundtrack, the videography, everything it's at that A-list. Like, it could be featured on the homepage of Netflix. Like, it's that level, which is really important if we're showing our friends and family that are on the fence, because they're like, wow, this is actually really professional. It's really well done, and I trust it because of that. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
That was actually a selling point that I heard in reflection from somebody, was if there's something this sharply put together plus the message, that's what really convinced. It was this guy's mom. It was oh my gosh, this is professionally produced and real. It's not just some YouTube B-movie thing that got cobbled together. But so that point, and I think this is what people need to understand, is that, the old saying, you can vote your way into communism, but you have to shoot your way out. Well, that's not 100% true. There are kind of two ways. There usually is some violence involved. There are usually two ways, or I say at least at the end of the film that there are only two ways out of communism. The first of those two ways is, in fact, war. You do have to have a full-blown revolt and shoot your way out. The communists, once they grab power, do not believe that anything they do is wrong. It's always that somebody else did it wrong. They didn't follow instructions. They didn't understand the theory. They still retained the wrong values. And so it's a purge after a purge after a purge, and it's the destruction of everybody. They're never going to stop. So you're going to have to shoot your way out if you can even get the weapons to do it. Free speech helps. During Mao's 100 Flowers campaign, he almost lost control of communist China in a few months because he gave people free speech, and they started figuring out how to use sticks to beat communists up. But that's a war you're handing to your children. And if you want your children to fight a war for their freedom that they have very bad chances in, that they're badly disarmed and outnumbered in, I don't know what to tell you, because that's what you're handing them. If you want to sit this out and not A, fight back, but B, have the discipline to fight back correctly in the name of the Constitution and for the values that built America and made it great. But secondly, communism ends another way, which is complete social collapse. So if you want to look at, for example, technically communism didn't end because Mao was very savvy. And then Deng Xiaoping, who replaced him in 1978 after he died, is also very savvy. Communism didn't end in China, but at 2 points, China completely collapsed economically. And if it wasn't for the vicious savvy of both Mao and then later Deng Xiaoping, actually Deng Xiaoping in both cases helping out, then there would have been, the communism would have collapsed because of utter economic failure. But during the Great Leap Forward, a minimum, this being the first of the great catastrophes in China, there are other big catastrophes to the tune of 10 million deaths, but the great, and I giggle because it's just so preposterous, but the Great Leap Forward is estimated conservatively to have cost 45 million lives, primarily by starvation and exposure. One of the points is that in 1960 and 1961, during the height of the Great Leap Forward, usually when you have famines, people die of disease in large numbers. Turns out people were starving to death and freezing to death too fast to get sick. And so the disease rates were high, but they weren't high enough to be the primary killer. And the primary killers were starvation and exposure, not even murder, which also was high. The primary killers were starvation and exposure. And that is what you're subjecting your children to in the process of collapse. And the ones who survive it inherit a country or inherit a living situation that's destitution beyond the concept of destitution. And they have to build out of that. And like I said, that's the condition that Deng Xiaoping in 1978 inherited from Mao after he died in 76. And Deng Xiaoping created the Chinese economy that they have today, which is a fascist economy inside of a communist country, in order to lift his people up out of poverty, which still took 25 years running an autocratic fascist economy at full tilt and being the entire manufacturing base for the rest of the world. It still took 25 years to bring Chinese out of abject poverty. And having been to China personally myself, I've still seen the stretches and depths of abject poverty for the people who aren't in that business class community or who aren't members of the party. And it's still abject, awful poverty. I mean, I've watched people who they're security guards for a hotel, and so they have like the little gatehouse outside the building at the entrance to the parking lot, and they live in it. They have a bunk in it. They live in that, and they're paid in pans of rice. They get a couple of pots of rice a day, and they have like a little bucket that they have to wash themselves in outside their guard hut in the morning. Don't tell me that, this has lifted everybody out of poverty in some amazing way. I've seen it with my own eyes. The middle class there is the business class who's caught serving the interests of the fascist economic system run by the Communist Party. And so that's what you're handing your children, even if it survives. But in the meantime, abject destitution. So you're handing your children destitution or war, and those things might not even get them out of the slavery that is communism. And right now we have a chance. We still have speech. We still have the ability to petition. We still have the ability to sway public policy, to sway the courts. They do not have all power yet. Our courts are in some cases very captured, but in other cases waking up very quickly and making very good decisions. The ESG cartel is being challenged by a large number of states now and is in trouble. It might end up coming to antitrust and breaking it apart. We are at not to quote Joe Biden in a favorable way, but he said correctly, we are at an inflection point in history, and it is up to us to get off the bench and make sure that this inflection point bends the right way, which is back toward the cause of liberty and back toward prosperity. Faith, freedom, and family, I guess, are the basis of those. So back toward faith, freedom, and family for all.
Which is so critical. And again, like, we get there through helping people see what's going on, which is again why this is so important. So the documentary, it's Beneath Sheep's Clothing movie. Go watch it, purchase it, donate if you want to support it. Watch it, bring your friends and family over. It's such a good tool. It's such a great tool. And James, I appreciate all the work that you've put into this. It's extremely important work what you're doing, and the documentary. It's not just important and good, but it's just so well done. It's entertaining. It's a movie that you're sitting there, your jaw open the whole time, like, holy cow, this is actually great. So, James, thank you for being on with me again. It's always good speaking with you, and hopefully these interviews can ripple. And that's another thing too, is that if folks want to help out, share this interview. Right, our last interview we did got a couple 100,000 views. Wow. It really went far because people were sharing it, because it's like it's at this time in history. Like, we just finished a debate where one candidate openly called the other candidate a communist, a Marxist. Right, this is now on the public. It's in the public sphere of discussion now. So that's why this movie, if the folks have been waiting and looking for the time and looking for the opportunities to kind of wake up their family, it doesn't get better than where we're at right now. And so this is a great thing to do. So, James, thanks again for what you're doing, and thank you for giving me and the audience your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, since you mentioned that getting so much reach, let me give one last comment. Actually, I just spoke in New Mexico, which is unfortunately like the forgotten state. It needs help. It needs a lot of help. And I'm not laughing like it's lost cause. Like, it's in trouble. It's very, very badly Democrat. If you don't recall, their Governor Grisham is the one who actually literally suspended the Second Amendment for a time, and then the Supreme Court had to overrule. And this Governor Grisham, she was put in the primetime slot during the DNC to give a speech on behalf of Kamala Harris. This is literally the person who suspended the Second Amendment. I mean, actually suspended the Second Amendment in New Mexico, which was obviously an anti-constitutional, egregious act. So I talked in New Mexico. I bring that up. I spoke in New Mexico just about a week ago. And one of the point of my message was that at this point, there's no more sitting on the sideline. There are two types of people in the world. There are leaders and there are supporters, right? So and I said leadership's on all levels, right? Maybe you're out there, you're a thought leader. Maybe you get involved and you run for office and you're a political leader. Maybe you create an organization locally, a grassroots organization, to get something done, and you're a leader in that way. Or maybe you're just a leader within your family. Or maybe you're just a leader in the fact that you'll tell the truth with your friends, but not everybody's made out to be a leader, and that's fine. I'm not going to criticize you. You ask yourself, figure it out. Can I take leadership? And if your answer is no, then there's two types of people. There are leaders and there are supporters. So find somebody who's being a leader and support them. Have their back. And like you said, one easy thing to do that can be both a leadership role or in a small way or or maybe even a big way, depending on what your position is. And then, you can be a strong supporter, is to share this interview, share the link to the film, watch the film and tell people about it. Getting this message out is something that everybody has the power to do. You don't have to have tons of money. You don't have to have tons of time. The movie's an hour and a half long. The interview's a little over an hour long. share these things and get them out, and it makes a difference. I tell people all the time, this is super nerdy, that in The Lord of the Rings, my favorite scene is when the wizard Gandalf explains about how the coming of the hobbits to the forest, which awakened the tree giants to go destroy the bad guy's fortress. He says that the coming of those two small hobbits to Fangorn Forest was like the felling of two stones that start an avalanche. So when you tell people about these interviews, you tell people about this film, you stand up and tell the truth about anything. You stand up at a school board meeting and say the truth to the people. You're talking to the school board, but you're really talking to the people who are watching. You don't know. You might be kicking a small stone down a hill that's going to start an avalanche that changes your community. So never be afraid to take that step. And like I said, there's only two types of people, leaders and supporters. And both of them are going to just be very blunt. Both of them are sharing this film.
Exactly. Well, James, thanks again, man. It's been great speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you.
So you've heard the news. Food factories burned to the ground. Millions of chickens gassed in the name of bird flu. Bill Gates and the CCP buying up farmland like there's no tomorrow. The government is literally paying farmers to slaughter livestock and shut down farms, and bugs are on the menu whether you like it or not. Just think about where this is headed. Henry Kissinger once said, "Who controls the food supply controls the people." And history is full of stories of tyrants using food to break people's will. Now, look, you're watching my show, which means you're probably not the kind of person that'll bow down to tyranny. But how long can you hold out when your kids are hungry or when you're forced to take a jab to eat? Look, I understand you have your own situation and you can only do what you can, but imagine how good you'll feel knowing you've got a couple months of food stashed away for when it all hits the fan. And as the old saying goes, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. But listen, not all storable food is created equal. A lot of the big food bucket companies use cheap fillers to lower the price per calorie. But in fact, it's during those difficult times when medicine's hard to come by, when clean water is hard to find, perhaps when you're struggling to survive, that's when nutrition matters more than ever. So this is why I recommend Heaven's Harvest. They're a Christian, patriot-owned company that has high-quality, storable food that will last for up to 25 years. So folks, don't waste another minute. Go to heavensharvest.com, and when you use the promo code Seth, you'll save 15% off your entire order. Again, that's heavensharvest.com and promo code Seth to save 15%. Folks, order now before it's too late.